The first dawn breeze drifted through the stone arches of Bodega Montoya, redolent of dust and crushed violets. Lucia Montoya paused on the catwalk above the fermentation hall and listened. She counted 7 steel tanks, breathing in the stillness, their cooling jackets ticking. Beneath that faint percussion fluttered the heartbeat of her kingdom. 600 American oak barrels, stacked 3 tiers high. Each contained fruit she would never see, yet knew better than the lines on her palms. She followed the pulses the way a sailor followed stars, cane tapping lightly until she reached row 11 and its symphony of scents. Plum, anise, the faint iodine of Mendoza soil. Her fingers brushed a barrel head. Oak this old should feel satiny, but a single stave was sticky, sap bleeding through a hairline crack. "Another leak?" Gustavo, her assistant, called from across the hall. His boots scuffed the grated floor. "That makes 4 this month. We'll lose half a case if—" Lucia shushed him. "Listen." She pressed the side of her nose to the bung. The air filtering through smelled of graphite and wet leaves, common in Malbec, but under it lurked something metallic, like a penny left on the tongue. A bitter armored note surfaced, sharp enough to sting her sinuses. Cyanide? No, too theatrical. Digitalis? Too earthy. Whatever it was, it did not belong to the grapes of Luchin de Cuyo. "Pull an extraction?" she ordered. Gustavo siphoned a sample into a glass. He knew better than to comment on the irony, a blind woman holding liquid up to non-existent light. Lucia did not need eyes to detect clarity. She swirled, counted the viscosity with her ears, then inhaled. The wrongness struck her harder now. Bitter cherry, crushed laurel. A toxic botanical, but masked cleverly beneath the barrel's normal ester profile, as though someone had consulted an enologist's lexicon of flavors and camouflaged murder among them. She spat into the drain and wiped her lips. "Quarantine it." "Another contaminant from the cooperage?" Gustavo asked. "This isn't contamination," she said. "It's intent." A hush fell over the hall, broken only by condors circling above the skylight. By mid-morning, Lucia sat in her office, window open to the Andes. Gustavo returned from the university lab clutching a printout. "Belladonna," he whispered. "Enough to drop a grown man in 2 sips. Lucia's breath caught. One detail in the report mattered more than the alkaloid concentration. The bottling date stamped on the barrel's head was tomorrow then. It was scheduled to leave the bodega in 3 days as part of a special consignment. For whose table? She rifled through the shipping ledger, fingers skating over raised braille labels she'd pasted months earlier. Row C17. 4 Malbec barrels, destined for Bodega Santa Serena, property of Don Vicente Odoyo, Nieze's father of the groom, whose wedding reception would host 200 guests, including ambassadors and half the Argentine wine press. The revelation tasted colder than the spring melt from Aconcagua. Santa Serena was Montoya's fiercest rival. Still, Lucien would rather toast Vicente's son than poison him. Their vendetta was business, not blood. Someone wanted that to change, and her good name stuffed in the barrel as the murder weapon. She remembered childhood Sundays before the accident stole her sight. Her father and Vicente clinking flutes, partners then. Time, greed, and water rights had sundered them, but not to the point of slaughter. At least, she hoped. "Gustavo, get me a driver," she said. "Where to?" "To Santa Serena, with the evidence." He hesitated. "You think they'll believe us?" "They'll taste for themselves. Bring sterile vials, chain of custody forms, and a fresh white cane. I don't intend to stumble into their lion's den unarmed." The drive north along Ruta 40 unspooled beneath gathering storm clouds. Lucia, in the passenger seat, kept the poisoned vial cradled in her lap like a sleeping serpent. She pictured barrel C17 rolling onto the wedding lawn, bottled and uncorked to cheers. How many sips before throats began to close? How swiftly would suspicion point back to her? Gustavo broke the silence. Could this be Order Jonya's doing, planting the toxin here so he can blame you? He's a proud bastard, Lucia allowed, but not a suicidal one. His family would drink first. Then who gains? Lucia traced her thumb over the braille on the vial label. Someone who profits when both our houses burn. She thought of the recent arrival of foreign conglomerates, buying land cheap after drought. A scandal between Mendoza's two icons could topple prices overnight. Another path, she murmured, but no proof. Overhead, thunder rolled. Santa Serena's gatehouse loomed like a fortress. A guard stepped forward, barking that tours were closed on wedding week. Gustavo offered the envelope containing lab results. Lucia added a crisp sentence in flawless Spanish that mentioned homicide. They were waved through fast. Inside the barrel room, chandeliers glinted off copper tanks. The air was perfumed with Cabernet Franc, black currant, bell pepper. Until Lucia's nose caught the same malevolent trace from earlier. It threaded beneath the dominant aromas, faint but present in the ambient air. Her pulse quickened. Don Vincente strode in, wearing a charcoal suit, though it was barely noon. "Señorita Montoya," he said, not hiding his surprise. "You send a messenger to curse my wedding?" Lucia rose from her chair, cane tapping twice. "I came to prevent a funeral." She handed him the vial. Gustavo recited the lab findings, voice steady. Vincente uncorked the sample, sniffed. "Smells like any young Malbec." "Taste," Lucia said. "No one tastes unknown wine during harvest." Yet pride pushed him to wet a fingertip. Seconds passed. His face blanched. "What did you do?" he hissed. Lucia's lips bowed in thin patience. "I saved you from serving that to your guests." Vicente's cellar-master, a gruff woman named Ramira, cursed. "This compound, it would kill, slow the heart, dilate pupils, seize lungs." Lucia recited, "A romantic death if you favor Gothic novels." Vincente slammed the vial on a barrel head. "So you admit your wine is poisoned?" "It left my bodega, yes. But not by my hand." She pivoted cane toward the racks. "And not only mine. Smell your air, Don Vincente." Ramira inhaled, frown deepening. She fetched a thieving pipette, drew from the nearest barrel, sipped. "Madre de Dios." Vincente glared at Lucia. "If both houses fall, why warn me?" "Because I honor the grape," she said. "And because murder soils everyone, we must find who doctored the barrels and when." "Tonight is the rehearsal dinner," Vicente muttered. "We tapped the wedding wine in 24 hours. Lucia faced blank darkness, yet envisioned every step of a crime. The saboteur would need unguarded access to both bodegas, knowledge of forklift schedules, and skill to microdose barrels without altering color or clarity. Someone trusted by all. A name surfaced. Marcelo Riesco, the region's freelancing copa, favored by both estates, recently hired to repair Montoya's leaks. Charming, efficient, and, Lucia remembered with a jolt, the owner of a pharmaceutical side business extracting herbal alkaloids for natural remedies. "We must speak to Marcelo," she stated. Ramira swore softly. "He's here. Arrived this morning to polish the wedding casks." As if summoned, footsteps echoed. Marcelo bounded in, smelling of cedar dust and aftershave. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. No one answered. Lucia cocked her head, letting sound paint her a silhouette. Tall, lean, a rasp in his breath from years of timber sawdust. She heard the faint click of a pen in his pocket. Click, click. "Nervous, Signor Riesco," she began, voice light. "You serviced 3 Montoya barrels last week. Barrel C-17, I among them." "I believe so," he stammered. "Marginal staph swelling, routine patch with belladonna varnish?" she asked. Silence thickened. Vicente advanced. "What did you do to my wine, bastardo?" Marcelo backed into a rack. Barrels creaked. "You don't understand. They forced me." "Who?" Lucia asked. He swallowed. Can't say. I have family. Lucia's cane rapped once, echoing like a judge's gavel. Then your family dies when those guests drink. Speak! But Vicente had already lunged. Gustavo restrained him. Marcelo trembled. A man from Cordova, name of Salvatierra, works for a conglomerate buying land here. He said if both your vineyards faced scandal, bank loans would default, values plummet. He'd scoop everything for cents. Lucia inhaled. She had suspected a vulture. Vicente spat. And you let him use my daughter's wedding. He threatened my sister's child. Marcelo's voice cracked. He gave me the extract, said no one would trace it, that fermentation would obscure it. He looked at Lucia, tears pooling. But you smelled it. I listened, she corrected softly. Wine tells stories to those who hush their ego. Thunder boomed outside. Ramir crossed herself. Vicente's fury simmered into calculation. We contact police. Lucia shook her head. The wedding is tomorrow. News fans will swarm. Investors will panic, regardless of guilt. We need a quieter solution. What do you propose? He asked. A blind tasting, she replied. The plan formed with the efficiency of harvest triage. They would isolate every suspect barrel from both estates. Lucia would use her senses to detect toxins. Ramira and Gustavo would run chemical strips for corroboration. Safe wine would be rebottled under neutral labels for the wedding. Evidence would be sealed, delivered to a judge after vows were spoken. Meanwhile, Marcelo would lure Salvatierra to a meeting under pretense of payment. Provincial police would listen in. Night fell in sheets of rain. Lucia moved through Santa Serena's cellar, filaments of candle smoke guiding her. Each barrel she approached offered a confessional. She inhaled, rolled liquid over her tongue, waited for the metallic whisper. 4 barrels out of 60 sang that wrong chord. She chalked X's on their heads. At 2 a.m. her palate went numb. Ramira forced her to sip milk to reset receptors. Gustavo massaged her temples. What if we miss one? He murmured. I won't, she answered. Yet fear nipped her fatigue. She had never wagered lives on her senses. Dawn broke. Storm clouds fled east. The Andes stood freshly powdered. Trucks shuttled safe cases to the Odoyo Joñas estate villa, where white tents blossomed on emerald lawns. Staff believed the rush was last-minute labeling. Only Lucia, Vicente, Gustavo, Ramira, and a circle of sworn secret workers knew they carried salve. The rehearsal dinner passed uneventfully. Fabio Ordoya toasted his bride, Camila, with a Malbec Lucia had personally vetted. Its blackberry and cocoa notes drew applause. She sat back, heart pounding, as 60 guests swallowed. No one fell. By sunrise of the wedding day, provincial detectives had Marcelo wired. He telephoned Salvatierra, voice shaking, said the job was done, and he wanted his money. They agreed to meet at an abandoned olive press on the outskirts. Police waited. Lucia and Vicente remained at Santa Serena, presiding over the final bottling. Between them hovered decades of rivalry, now distilled into wary alliance. You saved my family, he said, breaking a long quiet. Perhaps you'll remember that when water rights are renegotiated, she replied, a low chuckle. You drive a hard bargain, Montoya. She smiled faintly. Only a fair one. Footsteps approached, Ramira carrying a police radio. They've arrested Salvatierra and 2 associates. Confession already begun. A collective exhale. The wedding procession unfurled under an avenue of poplars. Violins floated, mingling with roses of lamb and rosemary. Lucia stood just beyond the dais, white cane planted like a staff. She pictured rows of guests raising crimson-filled stemware. She could not see them, but she sensed posture, breath, the delicate clink of glass. Harmony. Vicente strode to her side. You'll join the toast? I'll listen, she said. She held a flute anyway, fingertips memorizing its chill. When the officiant declared the couple wed, applause thundered. Fabio lifted his glass. "To love as enduring as our vines," he proclaimed. Lucia tilted her head as hundreds drank. No gasps, no collapse, only laughter bubbling like spring ferment. Relief flooded her limbs. Moments later, a hush fell as Vicente stepped forward again. "Before the feast begins, I must credit the woman who ensured we're all alive to celebrate. Senora Lucia Montoya." Audible surprise rippled. Cameras flashed. Lucia felt heat in her cheeks. She bowed slightly. "I merely honored the grape," she said into the microphone placed in her hands. "May we protect our soil, our water, and each other." To her astonishment, cheers rose from both Montoya and Orduzon's employees alike. Night found Lucia on Santa Serena's veranda, the reception dwindling to murmurs. Gustavo brought her a final glass of wine, the rescued Malbec. "Taste," he invited. She obeyed. Blackberry, violet, subtle smoke from a year in French oak, and beneath everything a clarity bright as glacier water. Purity reclaimed. "We did it," Gustavo said. Lucia turned her face to the starlit void. Constellations she could not see sprawled across sky, yet she felt their geometry in the cool hush. The vineyard rose rustled like a choir. She remembered her mentor's words long ago. Blindness closes the eyes, not the world. Tonight the world had spoken through wood grain, through molecules of scent, and she had listened. "Harvest begins again in 4 months," she mused. Gustavo groaned. "Let me sleep first." Lucia smiled. "Sleep, then dream of fruit untouched by hate." Across the lawn, Fabio and Camilla danced under fairy lights, unaware they had been spared a tragedy. That was as it should be. Wine, when true, erased bitterness. Lucia raised her glass to the dark. "Salud," she whispered. The Andes echoed her toast in silent majesty, and the night carried on, sweet as ripened Malbec, untainted.